There's a lot of crossover in what we're doing this week and what we're going to be asked to do next week. One of the things is working with a work breakdown structure. And that's going to officially be something that's delivered in week 5, but I think it's something we want to talk about early to give you the foundation for setting up what you need later on and helping you to make this build versus buy decision a little bit easier. One of the things that we have to understand is the schedule determines much of the cost of a software project. It's easy to say, I think this will take a week to do, but that week is going to be intertwined with a bunch of other tasks. There's really very seldom the ability to just say, oh, this is a 7-hour task and that's all it's going to take from a certain person, because people have to be around, they have to be available, they have to be able to ask their questions, they have to attend status meetings. There's always a time factor that comes into it. And then there's the question of delays and costs that come along with those delays and in the what if scenarios. So the schedule will help us give focus to the project and give some visibility for the difference between a build versus buy versus hybrid solution by tracking the timeline in which things get done, the people who are involved, and then the tasks that need to get done along the way. So parts of the building of the schedule are really easy. Defining the work. Hey, I know what I need to do. I have to build some requirements, do some design, so on and so forth. Defining the dependencies within those. Again, we want to get a bit more granular than just I'm going to do requirements design, but I know the order that they come up. So it's a little bit easier. It needs to be specific to your project, but we'll see this. It comes up without too much terrible extra work inside of that. There are parts of it that are very challenging, though, specifically the work breakdown structure when we get into estimation. The estimation of saying how long is this going to take and who's going to be a part of it, and how do I make sure I meet every demand that's part of my project and I get everything done the way it's supposed to do and in the amount of time I'm supposed to do. That can be very, very challenging. We'll talk about that separately. But let's start off with the first level, which is just figure out what the project's going to be made of. Figure out what pieces are going to be there for the project. So the WBS, the work breakdown structure, is a list of each of the things that's going to be done on the project. So if you're going to make a schedule, it shows up in the work breakdown structure. If you're going to write requirements, it shows up there. If you're going to write test cases of unit test, it goes there. If you make functional test, it goes there. You're writing some code, you're implementing every little task, and you want them to be granular as possible. So I don't want to just say write requirements. What requirements are you writing? You have functional and non-functional. There's a breakdown right there. Well, non-functional requirements, maybe you want to break that down further. I'm going to do usability requirements separate from performance requirements. Your functional requirements, well, maybe I'm going to do administrative site requirements separate than public site requirements separate from mobile app requirements. You can break it down to whatever level you need to better understand it. But that's going to be the foundation for how we get to this. Much like we talked about functional decomposition, we do something very similar in the tasks of getting the work done. We want to get to the item of what's going to get done. Eventually, we're going to say how long it's going to take. We're going to say what are the order of these things. I can't start test cases until I finish requirements. Those have to be done first. I might have certain test cases I can't do until the design is finished, particularly performance test cases. So I can't schedule those to start at a particular time. This comes up and is important because let's say I'm bringing the testers on board right away for the project to start to review the requirements, but then there's going to be a month off before they start working on the design. Based off after the design, before they start working on the test cases. Well, what do they do for that month? In a big company, they might go work on another project. In a small company, they might have to get paid that time. I have to hire somebody, I have to sit around and do something. So I know I have some time where they could be working on something else. Or at least I can add in the budget, I have to pay them for this time. I have to figure out who's going to pay them during this time. So those dependencies become important there. And so that's why we have to know who's working on which tasks at that point. So we can try and figure out the true cost, the true organization, the true needs of people and when they need to be onboarded and who needs to be doing what. And all of this is really important, but it just gives you the raw information. The process gives us the template for this, the software development lifecycle, whatever you've chosen, requirements, design, implementation, test, so on and so forth. Whatever your cycle is there. If you're doing iterations, it gives you a template for how to set those things up. but we need to be specific. We need to fill in based off of the project. If you're building a space shuttle, your requirements and your needs of your project, your work breakdown structure is going to be very different than if you're building a website, which is going to be different than if you're building a mobile app, which is going to be different than if you're building a batch job. It's not the schedule itself that we're working on here. The work breakdown structure is the building blocks that goes into the schedule. So let's look at an example of what a work breakdown structure might look like. Here's using a table. So we have a list of tasks. We take a guess at the duration it might take to write those tasks. What are the dependencies? What things have to happen before we can start working this task? And then ideally a resource. So looking more specifically, notice I'm talking about use cases. And I'm trying to identify all the use cases here. Now, if I'm really early in the project, I don't know what the use cases are. What I might want to do is do a quick iteration to get some more information. If I'm working at a waterfall project, I might have to come back and revisit my work breakdown structure after each phase, after we know more about the project that's coming up and what's going to be coming up. So this work breakdown structure could certainly be done iteratively or might be done in phases. But we want to be specific. So we want to write use cases for, as I said, logging in. And another use case is to buy stuff. Another use case is to return stuff. And depending on the complexity of those use cases, some might take longer than others to write. The dependencies here, it shows none because assumedly they're upfront, but maybe there are dependencies. Maybe I need to have the system business process for completing orders defined before I can write this use case. Notice here the resource, it could be a specific name. It could say that Sally or Susie or Tommy is working on these different resources. But also I could be saying it's business analyst 1 or business analyst 2. I could have a role out there and a number of people who I'm assigned to that. That'll come in more with the scheduling, but we do want to have an idea of the type of person or people that we need to fill that role. Again, we do an architectural overview. We need to have the project charter done for that, and that's going to be the architect who does that work. And we have specific design elements. So design of the web services, design of the data access object, design of the website pages, whatever those pieces are going to be. And then there's dependencies based off of use case X or use case Y. And then we have different people who's going to be working on those again. And again, you can see we're getting more and more specific. We code something. We test something. We design the test of something. We have all of these things that come up and provide our work breakdown structure. So when you get to phase 5, what you're seeing now is what you'll be producing. What you'll do in phase 5 is have a much greater level of detail. What I'm what I'm encouraging you to do for this phase is to consider at a high level what of these tasks would apply to your build versus your buy. Because this is going to give you an initial feel for some of the differences. It's going to allow you to do some greater comparison. I'm not saying you should have even this level of detail you're seeing here on that. But you could say, okay, well, these things are going to be in common, but this is the stuff that's going to be unique. And we'll see that as we look at the demonstration of this task for the week. Now, the work breakdown structure, as you build it, it yields for you the initial schedule. We will not ever really get to scheduling in this class, so you don't have to worry about this. But the idea is you can see here that there's different tasks that have different dependencies, and they come at different times. At this point, I'm not even worried about timeline. I'm just looking at which things must come before which things. And you see from the arrows that use case X comes before A, design A, and architecture comes before design A. Y becomes before B, and architecture comes before B. Y also comes before test design R. And there's no reason why test design R couldn't be done concurrently with the rest of the design pieces here. And then so on and so forth. You see these dependencies start to yield out. Then this in project management world is called a Gantt chart, if done very formally. And there's a lot of power in these charts. That's not what we're trying to do here. I just want you to see how the work breakdown structure can be taken to start to draw out the flow of the project. The important thing, though, is we're not trying to do the schedule. This isn't the schedule yet. It does give us a good look at the project. It gives us the basic outline and gives us a lot of the data we need to go into the schedule. What is important for this phase, it gives us a view of the work that needs to be completed and an ordering of the work to be completed, and lets us maybe see some missing steps or some missing pieces and ensure we have all the process and the functional requirements met. So do we have, let's say your process requires reviews. Well, immediately I have no reviews in my work breakdown structure. I should have put in there a requirements review, a design review, all those different pieces. If I require 3-day notice for that and people have to spend at least 2 hours doing those reviews, well, there's a cost right there. I have to figure out how many people need to review it and how much time they need to spend, multiply those together. That's going to be a cost to my project. And so it's going to be a time wait. If I have to wait 3 days on that, even if it's only 2 hours, from the time they finish a task, I have to spend 3 business days to give them time to review it, look at it, and then have the meeting, if that's what my process dictates. I've seen that before. So what we're missing before we get to a schedule is dates. We have to have, specifically, when does this thing start? We have to have resource availability. That's the second half of this. So we need to get down to a calendar date. What's the start date? How long does each task take? How many hours a day are people working? Are they working on weekends? What's the vacation schedule? What's the holiday schedule? Sometimes if you're working offshore, you assume like, hey, people can work. Well, they have different holidays in India, and they have different holidays in China. They have different holidays overseas than we might have, which works out well because sometimes we're on vacation because we have a holiday, and folks are working overseas. But there's other times where it works out exactly the opposite. So the availability is important. Who's the people? When are they available to work on this? What's their personal calendar look like? What's their personal schedule look like? That's what we'll see if and when you get to the point of doing scheduling. And we won't do this here. It's kind of a preview to say, hey, this is stuff you can do someday. But it's important to have a good feel for it, something you can understand later on. And what we can do and what we'll see is we can use the work breakdown structure to guide our build versus buy decision this week.